So, public veneration and devotion rose up, which led to, believe it or not, this exhumation of the bodily remains, as well as the distribution of their parts. So they were digging these people out of the graves and chopping them up, generally speaking. I mean, it really doesn't get much better than that, other than to say that, and we do that even now with some saints. Maybe not to the degree that it was done when it was first popularized. I mean, we won't literally dig them out of the grave, hack a leg off, and then splinter the bones up in a wood chipper or anything like that.
No, but you do. They still do it. When John Paul II and John the 23rd were canonized, the veneration of their relics was part of the canonization ceremony of the Mass. Yep.
So what this led to, this exhumation of the bodily remains and the distribution of parts, okay, there's a drastic shift here, and this is what I want to touch on in talking about the rise of the sacred relics. And the reason why I call it the rise of the sacred relics is because prior to this, prior to the public veneration and devotion, again, remember, kind of a little class warfare thing going on. You've got the aristocracies and the social elites who want to privatize this devotion. So what's happening is individuals are coming from far and wide to the tombs of the saints. That's called a pilgrimage. You go, to a holy site or to a holy place, hoping to obtain some sort of spiritual or otherwise temporal benefit from it. It's a pilgrimage. Not everybody could do that, whether because they were too ill or infirmed, just didn't have the money, the strength. Eventually, when the church says, all right, you know what, this is open to the public, just like there wasn't necessarily a charge to go to church or to go to Mass. Maybe, indulgence is an entirely different thing, or an entirely different topic. I can get into all that right now. But what happens is you have an increase in pilgrimages, sure, because, now that there are multiple fragments rather than just one bodily entombment, shrines started to develop. So, for example, in the United States, there are 3 major shrines to St. Jude that have large chunks of his bone. Now, it drives me a little crazy because I'm like, what in God's name is left in the St. Peter's Basilica, at the tomb of St. Jude? We got his finger, because we've got let's see, the Dominican Shrine of St. Jude on the Upper East Side of Chicago has got the whole forearm encased in glass in a statue. The International Shrine of St. Jude at what was my old parish when we were in New Orleans, Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is kind of in Uptown. They've got a portion of, I guess, an arm of St. Jude, or maybe it's part of the other bone that they have in Chicago. I have no idea. And they also have one in San Francisco. It's another shrine of St. Jude. So, just what is left? So nevertheless, these foundations of shrines, people would take pilgrimages, maybe not necessarily to the place of burial of the saints, but to their shrines. And of course, as with almost anything pushed to its excesses, there were some issues that came out of this. 3 that are not particularly mentioned in detail in Brown's work, but that are nevertheless important for our consideration. Simony, desecration, and even fraud as some emerging problems that came out. Simony is the sin of the sale of sacred relics. You can't sell human body parts, even if they are dead. All right, it's still done, and it's probably done to death. It doesn't make it any less sinful, though, to actually do that. Of course, there, as with all things, there are probably some loopholes, like if
donors.
I'm sorry.
Organ donors.
Well, yeah. I suppose so. Desecration would be another one. So, sacred relics, things like that, if they were to fall into the hands, for example, of someone who wanted to perform some profane or ungodly ritual or something like that, and they wanted, because whether or not they actually, whether it's hatred, motivated by hatred, or whether it's motivated by just an utter lack of belief. And this has always fascinated me. Whenever you have individuals who are members of negative cults, for example, like Satanism and their black masses and things like that, they always want an actual consecrated host, which is, of course, the real body of Christ. Why? Because they believe that it is actually something sacred, and they want to sort of desecrate that for the sake of acting in a manner that they believe will be pleasing to whoever they venerate. So, I mean, this is a problem with the rise of the sacred relics, because these are bodily portions of holy persons that are sacred to God. And then, of course, fraud. There were people who would fake the relics and would try to pass them off to others as if though they were actual relics of people that they were not. You know, somebody could take and break off a chicken bone or something like that and be like, "Look, I've got the finger of De La Salle." No, you don't. It smells like KFC. All right, so you don't.
Oh yeah, no. A couple years ago on eBay, I found somebody peddling.
You got him with you streaking.
I'm very sorry.
People were hawking relics of John Henry Newman, which is really hilarious because John Henry Newman famously was buried in some pretty bacteria-rich soil, and when they exhumed his relics to transfer them, for his beatification, all they could find was the little JHN plate that was nailed into his casket. Body, bones, anything organic was gone. And so you go on eBay and go St. John Henry Newman, and you can find like this wall of relics from the body of John Henry Newman. And how'd you find those?
The soil.
That's why they're worrying they dug them up.
The old English joke was that you could build the entire Royal Navy if you could reassemble all pieces of the alleged true cross from throughout the world.
So some of the quotes that have kind of come out of this little second section of this presentation, I liked one of them from Vidmar, because this was actually sort of the idea that many were trying to get at. And the idea was, if St. Cyprian is in heaven and I'm buried next to him, or so the argument ran, then my chances of being in heaven are greater. And this was what I refer to as the argument from proximity. So the closer you are physically to a site where there might be holiness, that holiness sort of rubs off on you, if you will. And then I liked this one as well. This is from Brown. Belief had emphasized above all the peaceful continuity between the self and the divine. And it did so by presenting the self as the last link in an unbroken chain, even when, in the face of physical death, this identity seemed least certain. The stability of the link with the spirit was thought to survive the splintering of the body. So again, that importance of the soul that may very well depart from the body, but it's only temporary. There will be, again, a reunion. We'll hit that up in the next section here. But my question to you then becomes #MaxMusings if you are live tweeting or anything like that. In what ways do we acknowledge belief that the saints, or even our dearly departed, our own relatives, our own beloved, are still very much with us? So in what ways do we acknowledge the belief that these persons are very much with us?
Every time I lose something, I say a prayer to St. Anthony.
Thank you, Bradley.
It normally works.
It does, pretty quickly, right?
St. Anthony's found my car keys a million times.
Uh-huh.
So aside from asking the saints to help us locate menial items, what else? What are the other ways that we might acknowledge that there is a continuity of spirit, or continuity of some form of presence within our lives?
So Durant just sent me a picture of he and Brother Joel together, so there are two saints there. How's that? So.
Very true.
Well, the one thing, and that idea of Saint Cyprian is in heaven and I'm buried next to him, so the argument ran, my chances of heaven are greater. And I that sort of feels like the way it looks, that holiness is sort of this mojo that might rub off on me. And that's never worked for me as a way of sort of explaining it.
That right there smacks to me of the same kind of thinking of let me send this big fat check to Rome so that I can get my papal bull that has my my excuse slip.
Yeah, my whole pass.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, and what I tend to think, you can't deny. I mean, and I did a little bit of catacombs research when I was in doctoral work as part of early Christian studies for me, and you go to the catacombs in Roma Sotterranea, the subterranean Rome, San Sebastiano, all these places along the Via Appia. And it's undeniable that where there is a concentration of graves, at the center of that concentration of graves, there's usually a martyr, where people, and I tend to think of that not as though, sort of it's rubbing off on me, or a little bit of that glory is sort of spilling over the top of the cup. I didn't think of it more as, sort of, whether this was what was in everybody's head or not. I tend to think of it more as when we talk about believing in the communion of saints, that what we're ultimately talking about is solidarity, social solidarity. If this is where the martyrs are, we're standing with them. We're hanging with that guy. We're rallying next to that standard, as opposed to rallying against the standard of the emperor that put them to death. And I tend to think of all the other material culture that sort of blows up around the cult of saints, whether it's the $1, now $1.50 candles that you get at the Mexican grocery store, or the medals, the scapulars, all these sort of things are reinforcing a sense of the communion of saints, of solidarity. It's not that they make us any more holy by proximity. It's that the solidarity is a way of reinforcing identity that ultimately pays off in actual holy living. Knowing that there's a St. Christopher medal on the dashboard of my car doesn't prevent me from getting into accidents if I'm careless. But maybe the St. Christopher medal on the dashboard of my car reminds me that I'm a saint and that I ought to be a little bit more courteous and a little more safe, with people who happen to ride in proximity to me on the road. And that's how it pays off. So more than just sort of the naked, kind of superstition, it actually becomes a way of strengthening those synapses in our brain that lead to a kind of holiness and virtue in living. That's the way I tend to sell it to people that aren't Catholic and don't get the same thing. I say, I don't think I'm one bit more holy because I've got, a crucifix or anything else. But chances are that my knowledge that there's a crucifix, it's a little bit like having a collar, on my driver's license picture. You pull over a cop after you've driven like a dumbass, well, it looks bad, so you tend to drive a little bit more cautiously and carefully.
We need a patron saint of road rage.
I'm sure there is one.
Jerome.
There's tons. There's hundreds of thousands of saints, and we don't even, dear God. But Yeah, I'd be interested to know because I could use it as well.